All right, I think we'll get started now, and more people can come in as we go. But welcome everyone to the DEVS Web Development Workshop, and also welcome back to the semester. We'll kick things off first by having a look at what we're going to go through in this workshop, and just having a quick overview. So to begin with, this workshop is basically about developing websites, like lightweight websites for personal reasons. So this could be a personal portfolio, this could be like a photography portfolio, a brand website, a blog, those kinds of things. So we're going to start by talking about web architecture, which is basically the design of our website in terms of the sort of bits that go together to make it work. And then we'll explore the architecture of our application, which is known as the tech stack. And after that, we'll dive right into the practical, where we'll be building a personal portfolio, and we'll also be adding a blog to it. So let's kick things off by looking at the traditional web architecture, which is the way web applications have been built in the past and still are. Now, this sort of design has these four components to it: the front end, a web and application server, and the database. The front end is what users interact with. Now for us, it'll be a website, but it can just as easily be a mobile app or a desktop app and so on. Now what happens is typically a user interacts with the front end, and this interaction results in a request for data from one of these servers here in the middle. These servers then retrieve that data from the database, and it comes flying back to the front end for the user to see. So for example, let's say you visited the New Zealand Herald website and you clicked on a news article. The website will request the content for the news article from a server, one of these two. And these servers will in turn request it from the database, which is where the content is stored. Finally, that article will be returned back to the server, and then finally back to the client. Yeah, so you request your news article, the request goes to a server, goes to a database, and finally back to your website. Now, this sort of design is well suited for complex web applications which have lots of functionality. Think, Facebook.com, so on. But the thing is, for more simple websites, like your portfolio or a blog or a brand website, this architecture is simply overkill. All of these layers here, the server and the database, they add complexity. And if you were to create them, it would take considerable amount of time and effort, and it would also be expensive to host on some cloud provider. So what's a more lightweight alternative? Enter a new architecture known as the Jamstack. Now, the main part of Jamstack is the static front end. So pay attention to the keyword here, static. And what exactly is a static front end? Well, recall how in the traditional architecture, whenever the user visited a web page, the data for that page would be requested on an as-needed basis. So you click on an article, and the content for it will be requested from the database. Now, in a static front end, all of your pages are created ahead of time. What this means is, if you clicked on an article, you wouldn't have to wait for data to be requested since the page will be pre-populated with data. And so you'll immediately see the article. Let's go back to the traditional architecture so I can explain a bit more what I mean here. So I'll once again recap how this works. You visit, say, a blog, and you click on a blog post. Now the data for that blog post, the actual post itself, lives back here in the database. So the request for it goes to a server, the server grabs the blog post, and it comes flying back to the front end. Now, this chain of requests takes considerable amount of time. In a typical web page, this accounts for the longest sort of wait period. And so if you are able to cut this part out, If your pages already had the content in them, then you could cut out the longest part of your sort of loading period, and your pages would load much quicker. Now, what this means is if you had a blog post, if you had a blog, for each blog post that you have, a page would be generated for it that will already have the post in it. And users simply open the page to see it. That's where the CDN comes in, known as a content distribution network. You have all this content, which are the web pages that have been generated for each blog post, and you need a way to distribute them around the globe so that people can access them from all over the internet. And so all your content is distributed over the network, the CDN. The final component here are services. Now, this is a sort of catch-all term that encompasses various sort of plugins that provide functionality to our website. It's because of these that we don't have to sacrifice the functionality that a traditional web architecture provides. Let's say, for example, you had an e-commerce website. Now, there you could have services that handle the carts, or that handle billing, that handle shipping, and so on. In our example, which is a blog, we will have a service that handles managing and creating blog posts from a user-friendly interface for us. Now, the biggest benefit that a Jamstack architecture provides is performance. As I mentioned earlier, all of your pages are already built ahead of time. And so you don't have to wait for requests to a server to get data. You cut out that entire portion, and this leads to much quicker load times. You can see this for yourself by visiting a Jamstack website, like the DEVS website. You'll notice that pages tend to load much quicker, and you don't have that effect where the layout of a page will load, but the content won't appear for about a second later or something like that. It's because the content already is embedded into the page. There's no requesting it. Another benefit we see here is scalability. Let's say your content goes viral and your blog gets millions of visitors. Well, this CDN that we have back here, this CDN that we have back here, if you get millions of visitors, because your content is distributed across various servers all over the world, it will distribute traffic to those servers across the world as well, so as not to overload a single one of them, thereby keeping your website online. This is a concept known as load balancing. And finally, the benefit, which hopefully we'll all experience today, is the improved developer experience. Jamstack websites are incredibly lightweight and easy to develop, as you'll see. You also don't have to develop a separate backend, which are the servers and database, which keeps the development time and effort low and makes hosting your website much cheaper, in most cases even free. Now let's take a look at the specific technologies that we'll be using today to make our portfolio and blog. So Gatsby is a static site generator. It's what will allow us to create a static front end by building all of our pages ahead of time. So we provide Gatsby with the content that we want to display, which in our case would be the blog posts, and it will build all of the pages for each blog post for us. Now Gatsby uses React, and React is a JavaScript framework. Frameworks are tools that allow us to create complex applications with relative ease. In an application like a blog or like a portfolio, you can imagine that there's some complexity behind the scenes, such as handling the blog posts and so on. This complexity is something that we as developers don't want to deal with. We don't want to deal with, how is data retrieved? How is it then posted somewhere else? And so frameworks abstract away the difficulty and instead expose a simpler interface to work with. This might sound a bit ambiguous, but as we start working through it, you'll understand what I mean. Now, finally, we have the service that we're going to use here, Netlify CMS. A CMS, which stands for Content Management System, allows us to create and manage content such as blog posts through a user-friendly interface rather than having to manually add or modify files or having to go through a custom-built database. Now, in this case, our CMS is going to be managing blog posts, but CMSs could just as easily manage any collection of data. So if you are a photographer and you wanted to showcase your work, you could manage the content, which is going to be photos in your case, through a CMS. If you've wondered how websites like medium.com, for example, make their blog posts and manage them, they have a CMS in the background which their editors use to create these posts. So with all that being covered, let's dive right into the practical, where we'll be creating a personal portfolio and a blog. Now, the Facebook event link has a link here to the GitHub repository for this workshop. So on this repository, first you'll find some prerequisites, which you hopefully have already done. And under them, you will find instructions. So we're going to be starting from part 1. Now, before I begin, ideally this workshop would have been in person. So as people had questions, we would have been able to help you along. But due to the nature of our circumstances, we're online. Now, this means that if you have questions, trying to get help might be a bit more difficult. To make it easier, we have a bunch of TAs in the Zoom call as well. So you can drop your questions into chat and they'll answer you. Or alternatively, there is a Menti, which is a place where you can ask questions and they'll pop up on my screen. So someone in chat right now will drop the Menti code. And so you just visit menti.com and enter the code and you'll be able to ask questions there as well. Now, you have sort of two options with following along here. You can either follow along and wherever you fall behind, you can consult this repository because it's got detailed both explanation and instructions for every step that we're going to follow. So if you fall behind or you get confused at a point, you can just consult these. Alternatively, you can choose to simply just watch us and see the steps that we're going to take and sort of absorb this information. Then come back in your own time and either watch the recording, because this is being recorded, or follow the steps and basically just do this at your own pace in your own time. How you do it is completely up to you. Do what's best for you. All right. With that said, let's get started. So the very first thing you want to do is create a folder on your PC where you want to store the project that you're going to do. So, I mean, if you're on Mac OS, just open Finder and create a folder somewhere. Same thing for Windows, just use your File Explorer. So I have my folder. This is where I'm going to place this is where my website will go into. And then you want to open Visual Studio Code or a text editor for your choice. All right. So when you open Visual Studio Code, you'll see a screen like this and a welcome screen, and you want to click Open Folder and then select the folder you've created, or simply drag and drop it into code and it will open it for you. All right. Then you want to go back to the instructions and we're going to run this command here. So what you want to do is you want to just copy it, go back to Visual Studio Code. There it is. And you want to go to Terminal, New Terminal, and just hit paste. Now, what's happening here is we're installing the Gatsby command line interface. We're basically installing Gatsby onto our computer. As I mentioned, Gatsby is what allows us to generate our pages ahead of time, and it's basically going to be the tool that we're going to use to build our application. So this will take perhaps a minute or so to run, depending on the internet speed and so on. And after this finishes, we're going to run this second command here. So you want to copy this. You want to go back to code. There it is. And you want to paste it. And hit enter. Now, what is this doing? Oh, sorry, just give me a second. If you paste it, it should just work. I just have a little bug with my system that I have to do that. But you paste it and then it'll start to create a website. Now, let's go back to the command. Let's see what it's doing. So we're invoking Gatsby. We're telling it to create a new blank application and we're giving it a name. You can call this whatever you want. We've called it My Portfolio. And then there's a link here. This link is what's known as a starter template. So this is basically code we've provided for you that will speed up the development and basically make things a little easier. So it just provides some starter code to get us started a little quicker. So let's go back to here and you see it's ticking away, generating our files. You can mostly ignore all the output in here. We just want to see this output right here. Your new Gatsby site has been successfully bootstrapped. Start developing it by running these two commands. So first we copy that one. We'll cd my portfolio. And then we type Gatsby develop. So what Gatsby develop does is Gatsby develop will take all of the files that have been generated in this blank application, it will build them, and then it will serve them to us. So serving means it will expose them so that we can view them in our browser. You'll see here, you can now view your website in the browser, and you'll see a link. So either copy this, or command click, or control click. So you hold control or command and click the link, and it will open in your browser. And you'll see a message saying, hello world, right there. If you see this, that means your blank application was successfully built and served. So that's great. We can now get started with actually developing our application. Now, before we do that, I'll show you a quick render of what we're going to be making. So this is sort of the design we're going for here. I know it's very simple, but that's because we've only got about a half hour to design this and then a bit more time to do the blog. But obviously, you would invest a lot more time to make your portfolio stand out and look the way you want it to. So we've basically just got a header up here with links to the home, projects, education, experience blog, and then just some information about us. Pretty simple, but we'll just get cracking with it. So head on over back to Visual Studio Code, and we'll take a look at the files that have been generated. So on the left here in the File Explorer, if you don't see this, by the way, then just click this. Expand the folder titled My Portfolio, and in this you'll find another folder called Source. And inside of Source will be another folder called Pages. Now, the files inside of the Pages folder will act as the actual navigable web pages of your application. So for example, currently we see here a file called index.js. If we had another file here called, say, blog.js, we could navigate to that to that page by going to like localhost 8000/blog. So the name of the file becomes the subpath of our website URL. So let's open the index.js file and take a look at what a web page looks like. Now, I should mention index.js is a special case. Files called index can be visited by just going to your domain. You don't have to do /anything. You just go to, for example, mywebsite.com, and you will go to the page that's in index.js, which is what we see here, this one. So here we are in index.js. Now, the very first line is an import statement. And it's basically declaring that this page is going to be built using React. So we're importing the React sort of package, and it's declaring that this is a React web page. Now in React, web pages take the form of functions. And these functions return an HTML element which represent that page. So in this file, we have a function, and it's called home. This is our home page, and it returns this HTML element here. So this is a div element. You can think of div as a sort of invisible container, and it's simply got this text inside of it. It just says hello world, and that's what we see here. So I could, in fact, change this to say anything. Say hello in my name, Sinan, and if you go back to your terminal, so terminal, the new terminal, oh, right here. Then, oh, here we are. Yeah. So that says hello, Sinan. I should mention, when you change a file and you save it from Control S, Command S, you see here it rebuilds your web pages. So you don't have to keep turning. You don't have to like close the terminal and restart it. It will rebuild the pages. It just might take a second for the changes to be reflected in your browser. So keep that in mind. Now, so we've seen what web pages look like in React. Oh, sorry, I have a question here. When I run npm install, it gives me lots of errors. Why this situation happened? Right, well, the reason those errors occurred will most likely, the nature for those errors will be revealed through the error messages. So if you drop those error messages into chat, either a screenshot or just copy paste them, I'm sure someone will be able to sort you out. But yeah, without knowing what the exact error is, I'm afraid I wouldn't be able to help you out. But someone in chat will. Just drop them in there. Anyways, back to this. We've seen how web pages work. Let's get started making our portfolio. So once again, this is what this is going to look like. Now, before we make any of the pages, any of the projects, education, so on pages, one thing that is going to be the same on all of my pages is this header, this sort of thing outlined in blue. So it has a name and it has links to the other pages. Now, what I could do is I could create each page and create the header in each page one by one. So I would have 5 copies of this header. But we don't like repeating code. It takes too long and it's hard to change the header later on. You have to change it 5 times. So instead, what we do is we write the header once, and then we can use it multiple times using components. So let's see I'll show you what I mean. We'll just get started and you'll see what I mean. So what you want to do is you want to right-click source, and this is important. Don't right-click pages because they're right next to each other. Right-click source and click new folder and create a folder called components. Now inside of components, you want to right-click components and create new file. And you want to call this file header.js. So this is going to be our header component and it should open up. So because this is going to be a React component, we have to import React. So go on, type import React from. Now, as I mentioned, web pages as well as components take the form of functions in React. So we're going to write first 2 keywords, export default, then the function keyword, and then our component name. So this is going to be a header, and the function body goes within curly brackets like this. And as I said, React components or pages return an HTML element. So return and open bracket, go into a new line. So this can take multiple lines. Right, now our header, in HTML, there's a element known as the header element. So we're going to insert that. So we type open angle bracket, start typing header, close angle bracket, and the closing tag should appear on its own. Hit enter to go into a new line. So I'll just split this so we can see. I want this name first. And so to insert just plain text, I use a paragraph tag. So that's a P tag. And I'll type John Smith. And then I have these 5 links. And because these links are sort of contained by themselves, they're within their own sort of container, I'll put them inside of a div container. As I mentioned, div is like an invisible container. So within this, I need to create these links. Now, Gatsby provides us a component known as the link component. And basically what this is it's just text which you're able to click and it'll send you somewhere to a different URL. So to create a link, open angle bracket, type link with a capital L, close angle bracket. So for example, to create a projects link, I write project. So this is the text that will be shown. And then to specify where this link goes to, type to equals open quotation mark. So this is a double quotation mark. And then the subpath. This is going to go to projects. So when you click the projects link, it will take you to yourwebsite.com/projects. Now, you'll notice this link is in yellow. This means that this is a non-standard element or a component. And anytime we use something which is non-standard, we have to import it. So we'll type import, and then we have to type link between curly brackets, like that. And this is coming from Gatsby. So this component is provided by Gatsby. And then we'll just copy this 5 times for all of our links. So once for the home, projects, education, experience, blog. And we'll just retitle them. So that's home, projects, education, experience, and then our blog. Our blog will be on /blog. And by the way, this path has to correspond to the file that represents that page. So right now, I know we don't have it, but our blog, since it's going to /blog, its page would have to be called blog.js. That's how they're mapped. Our experience education, and home is a special case. Home is just an empty slash. So your home is just yourwebsite.com/nothing. So now if we go to our website, we see that nothing has changed. And that's because we've created this component, but we haven't actually used it. So the way we use it is, let's go back to our homepage, which is index.js. So sorry about that. Let's go back to our homepage, which is index.js. And we're going to remove this HTML element. So no more hello message. We'll do open bracket, enter to go to a new line. Then we're going to add our header. So similar to the link component, our header component is header with a capital H. So we type it like that. And then we close the tag immediately. So normally, if you look here, the header tag in this case has a closing tag. But if you provide a slash before the closing angle bracket, it closes on the same tag that it opens, known as a self-closing tag. So you don't need a closing header tag. And if I save this and the page rebuilds, you'll see an error. The error is header is not defined. The error is in this file in index.js, which is the file we're in. And the error itself is header is not defined. Now, can anyone tell us why this error exists? I've defined my header, it's right here in this components folder, and I'm using it right here. Can anyone tell me why I'm getting this error? Let's see. Yes, that is right. That is right, Dong Mei Lim. I haven't imported it. Someone in chat, please contact this individual. They'll be getting a prize, a Google Home, for their excellent answer. As I mentioned, custom components, things that are non-standard, you have to import them. So we need to import our header. So we'll import the header. Where do we get it from? Well, it's inside the components folder, and we're right now in pages. So we go outside of pages. So 2 dots mean go outside of your current folder. Then we'll go into components, and we'll grab the header /header. And there we have it. There's our header, John Smith, and our 5 links. But it looks nothing like how I want it to look. This is how it should look, and that's how it does look. It's a bit different. And the reason for that is because we haven't yet styled any of this. This is just how it's rendered by default. So to fix that, we have to add styling. Now, let's add styling. Right-click this source file and click New File. We call this file styles.css. So this is a CSS file, stands for Cascading Style Sheets. And basically, this allows us to define style rules for each element on our web page. And those rules define how those elements will appear. Now, the first thing I want to do is I want to put these on the same line. So right now they're top and bottom. I want to put them in line. So in our header file, what I can do is I can style this whole header element. So to select an element in CSS, you just type the element's name. So it's just header. And then the rules go within curly braces like this. Now, I won't go into exhaustive detail as to how CSS works and what all the different properties are. I'll just explain the ones I write, and you'll have to sort of take my word for why they work. The first rule is the display rule. And the value comes after a colon, and its value will be flex. And the flex direction will be row. So this will basically put them in a row. Now you see it hasn't applied yet, and that's because, once again, styles are not included in the header.js file. You have to import them. So a style import isn't named, so you just simply say import and then where the file is. So /styles.css. I save this and the page rebuilds. Hopefully we can see this. Maybe. There we are. Now they're in line. So let's now vertically center them. So first I'll give my header a height of 100 pixels. So that's how tall it is. And I will align items. So this will vertically center our items. There they are, in a line. Perfect. Now I want to apply a font to my page and also a text color. And I want this to apply to every single element. So if I go back to my render, they all had the same font and font color. The font weight and size differs, but the font and font color is the same. So to apply rules to every element, we have a selector known as the asterisk selector, or the star. So asterisk applies to every element. And to apply a font, we have a rule called font family. I want the font to be Arial, and as you start typing, you'll get some suggestions. Just pick the first one. What this means is apply Arial to the website. If the computer doesn't have Arial, apply Helvetica. If it doesn't have Helvetica, fall back to any sans serif font. So you can just specify as many fallbacks as you want. And then I'll specify a text color. So this will be a hexadecimal value. So we'll do hash 70, 70, 70, which is a sort of gray color. And you see my text is now in Arial and it's a gray color. Now I want to style this John Smith name to look more like how it's meant to look like. So what I could do is in header, the John Smith is a paragraph tag. I could style the paragraph tag. I could do, P and then apply my rules. But the thing is, this will style every paragraph, every bit of text on a website inside a paragraph tag. And I don't want that. I only want the John Smith to look different. So the way we style a specific element is we give that element a class name. So after this P here, add a space and type class name. And you can give this whatever name you want, but I'll call it name. And then to select a specific class in CSS, we do dot followed by the class name. So class name here was just name. And now we can style that specific paragraph element. All right, so first I will remove all padding. So this padding is basically like empty space around an element to sort of push it away from other elements. We'll remove all of that. Then I'll set the font size to be a bit bigger. So font hyphen size of 36 pixels. And as I save them, they'll start applying. Then I'll set the font weight, which is how bold the font is. And this is a value of 700. And I'll go bold in a second. And then I'll specify some left padding. So that's not pushed right up against the edge. There will be 20 pixels gap right here. All right, so now my name looks how I want it to look. Let's take care of these links. So to style the links, we want to style this div element. Now, you don't want to style every div element. You want to style the specific one. So you give it a class name. We'll call it navigation. Okay. So then we'll select the navigation element, the navigation div container. We'll give it a height of auto. And this basically means the content can grow larger if it gets bigger. And then we'll give it a margin left auto. And once it applies, it might take a second to apply. Hang on a second. I think we might do this instead. Margin 0, 0, 0 auto. Save that, and there we go. Okay, so the margin property, these four numbers are top, right, bottom, left. So we set the top, right, and bottom margins to 0, and then we set the left margin to auto. An auto value basically means grow the, in this case left, grow the left margin as much as you possibly can until the content can no longer move. So the left margin has grown as much as it possibly can, and as a result, they're now right aligned. Now I want to style these links inside of navigation. So these links, as it says, in HTML, they become A elements. So similar to how these are P elements, this is a P element, in our actual page, they will translate to A elements. So to style them, we style the A element. Now, I want to style only the links inside of this class, inside of this div class. And there's a way to do that in CSS. So we can type the class that is the containing class. And then if we do a greater than symbol, we can select a element which is contained. So we want to style all of the A elements inside of the navigation class. First, I'll do color inherit. This property basically means inherit the color that every other that your parent container has. What this basically does is it will stop the links from going purple when you click on them. Then we'll remove the underline through the text declaration none property. There goes the underline. We'll give them some margin so that they're not clumped up together. There they go. We'll make them a little bit bigger, font size of 20 pixels. And then we'll make the font lighter, font weight of 100. Right. So now our header looks more or less how we want it to look like, with some variations in font. You can play with that and make it look exactly how you look in your own time. And with that, the header is basically done. Now what we're going to focus on is the, what is it? Is this, the about me and my interest section. Okay, so go back to index.js inside pages. And underneath header, we're going to create another div container. This will be the container for the text on our website. And we'll save that. But as soon as you save, you'll get an error on your page. And you'll also see some errors in here. Error reads, a JSON JSX elements must be wrapped in an enclosing tag. Did you want a fragment? What on earth does this mean? Well, as I mentioned earlier, in React, your functions have to return a single HTML element. And here we're returning two. We're returning a header as well as a div. So the way to fix this is we can simply put these inside of another div. So, inside of a div, like that. And now, if we cut paste them into here, now they're inside of this div, and our website works. We're returning only one element, which is this div. The others are simply inside of it. Okay, let's add a heading tag, which is an h1 tag, and we'll write about me. Save this, it should show up here. There it is. And we need to have some text, so we'll do a paragraph tag, and we'll add our text. Now, for your real portfolio, obviously you would write about yourself, actually, but in this case, I will just copy paste this dummy text. Just so I don't have to think of things about myself. There we are. And we'll copy paste this again for the my interests. There, so there's the text, but it isn't styled how we want it to be styled. So before we style it, remember you have to import the styles file. So let's first import the styles before we define any styling rules. So import /styles.css. Here's a question. When do I use margin and when do I use padding? That's an excellent question. Right. Well, to explain that properly, you'd have to know a bit more about the box model, which is how HTML elements are rendered onto your screen. Basically, each element, so this is a paragraph element, has a border around it. Perhaps I can show you if I do one of these. So this is just extra for experts you can think of. It's not necessary. So each element has a border around it. That right there, the border. Padding is space that goes between the element content and the border. And margin is which is space that goes outside of the border and other elements. Now, in most cases, semantically they're the same. So here I could have defined margin left as well. But in cases where, for example, this content sits inside of something else, say this content, my name sat inside of, I don't know, a rectangle I defined. If I added padding, it would push it away from the rectangle's borders. If I added margin, it would push the rectangle away from other elements, right? So, I mean, in most cases, it doesn't really matter. You can sort of experiment, but there are moments where there's a bit of a gotcha if you use padding instead of margin. There's another question telling me to use a React fragment instead of div. That is correct. Yes, typically we do use fragment, which is nothing, but that is also confusing and hard to explain. So we use div. But yes, for those of you that do know fragment, you would use fragment instead. Am I really testing me here? Okay. Now, where was I? Yes, styling this. Okay, well, we imported the styles. Let's give our container a class name. So we style only this container, and we'll call it container. Right. And then we'll go to styles.css, and we'll style that container. So dot container to select that container. First, we'll give it a width so it doesn't span the whole page width like this. And the width will be 65 VW. VW is a unit which stands for viewport width. And it basically means make it 65% of your browser width wide. So this is now 65% of this page width. If I make this wider, it will get wider as well, but always be the same proportion of my overall browser width. And then finally, we'll set a property for margin, 0 auto. So the first value in margin, you can specify either one value, two values, or four values. So if you specify two, the first value means top and bottom. Second value means left and right. So what I'm doing here is I'm setting margin left and right to auto. I mentioned earlier when I set margin left to auto for the links, it pushed them all the way to the right. Now, what do you think is going to happen if I set both the margin left and the right to auto? What do you think is going to happen when I save this and the change applies? Can anyone tell us in chat? Oh, perfect, yes. Excellent answer, Cheng Zhen Yang. The content will be centered. Somebody please hit him up as well after the workshop. So in both the left and right margins are trying to grow as much as possible, the content will be forced into the middle. And that's what's happened here. Right, now I want to style these headings here. So within container, I want to style the h1 tag, and I'll just add some margin top, 50 pixels. This will just push it down a bit. And then again, within container, I want to style the paragraph tag, which is these text bodies here. And I will just increase their font size a tiny bit to 18 pixels. That's a bit easy to read. Now we're pretty much done with our home page. So if we compare it to our render and I reduce my zoom, it looks more or less like how I intended it to look like. So this is a home page done. And we'll quickly do the other pages. Now, to do the other pages, what I'll do is I'll simply duplicate this homepage and change the title. The reason I'm doing it like this is because we're short on time. If I made every other page as I should, then we'll be here for a couple hours instead. But obviously for your real portfolio, you would create each page individually. I'm only doing this to show you how paging works with Gatsby. So right-click index.js and click copy, then right-click pages and click paste, and you'll get index copy. Rename this to whichever other page you want. I'll do projects. Now you should be in projects.js. Let's close all the other files. Call this function projects. All right, delete this. Don't need that anymore. We'll only have one paragraph, and it'll be about my projects. Right. Hopefully, if I click this, it works. It didn't. Okay. If this happens for you, what you should do is open back your terminal and simply kill it, and then open your terminal again and restart it. When you open it, you'll be in the wrong directory, so make sure you run this first, cd my portfolio, and then do Gatsby develop. Gatsby will rebuild. Sorry. Ignore that. That shouldn't happen for you. Gatsby will rebuild existing pages as you change them. As you add new ones, it might not necessarily catch that immediately. So we'll just simply restart our development from scratch. There it is. Right, here we are on projects. Now, so the projects page is on /projects. And yeah, so when you go from home to projects, you'll be navigated to a different page. You'll notice that projects makes use, this file here on the left, makes use of the same header component. So we don't have to rewrite the same component. We wrote it once in this file, and now we're able to use it both on the projects page and the index.js page. So I'll leave out the other pages because they're pretty much duplicates of how I made projects. And with that, that basically covers the first part of the project. So by now, what you would have learned is components, which is basically making reusable chunks of your website to be able to use in other places. So I made a header component. You could do the same for a footer component. Or, for example, this container, you could make that into a component and reuse that. So get into the habit of finding bits in your website where you're basically doing the same thing again and again and make it into a component. You also learned about pages. So creating page files results in pages that you can go to. So if I go to, well, I'm already on projects, but if I go to home, I see my home page. If I go to projects, I see my projects page. We also learned a little bit about styling and element selection, styling rules, and so on. Now we'll have a short break, and after this break, Alan will take you through part 2 of the workshop, where we'll be creating a blog.
Okay, sweet. We'll get started now. Just to recap what we've done, we've created a couple of pages as well as a component and did some styling on that. And now what we're going to do is create the blog. But before this, we're going to be uploading our code to GitHub. Now there's 2 reasons why this is useful. First, it's just good practice to have a backup of your code somewhere, in this case online. And secondly, Netlify CMS, so our CMS requires that our project to be on GitHub or some version control hosting website so that it can upload our blog posts to that website. But in our case, we'll be using GitHub. So first, we'll have to commit our code. So if you're using Visual Studio Code, you can do this by going to this source control button here, clicking on that, hovering over changes, and then pressing the plus button. And this will stage the changes and then enter a message. So for instance, finished personal portfolio. And then pressing the tick, and this will commit. Sweet. So once we commit it, we can actually make a repository on GitHub. So let's go to github.com and press the plus button here and click new repository. Now we can name this repository anything we want. In my case, I'll name it personal portfolio. And we can change it from public to private. It's up to you. In my case, I'll make it private and just press create repository. Sweet. So the next thing we want to do is copy these 3 commands here. So right-click copy, go back to Visual Studio Code, and open up the terminal. So if you can't see this terminal, you can go terminal and then press new terminal. And then you want to paste these commands in, like so, and then just press enter. And then our project will be uploaded to GitHub. So if I were to go back to GitHub and then refresh the page, then we'll see our project here. Sweet. Now we can actually get started on the blog. So there's 3 steps to, well, creating this blog component. First, we need to create some type of interface for users to write blog posts. Second, we need to create a page that displays all of the blog posts. And third, we need to create individual pages for each individual blog post. So I'll be showing images of what that will look like as we go through each step, but we'll just go through the first step. So the first step is to create an interface that allows users to write blog posts. And just to show you what that would look like, I have some images here. So this is what it's going to look like at the end. Over here, we can see collections. So in our case, we're going to have a collection of blog posts, and that's going to be called blog. If we want to create a new blog post, then we click this new blog button here. Maybe it should have been called new blog post, but that's fine. And if we do click that, then this page will pop up. In order to write our blog post, we just fill out the different fields here. So for instance, we can put in the date, the title, the author, the path, and the body. Now the path, just to talk about it a bit more, is the section of the URL that the user must go to in order to see this particular blog post we're writing. We'll get into more details afterwards. But once you're done writing this blog post, they can press this publish button here, and then it will be uploaded to GitHub. Sweet. But this looks like a lot of work because there's so much going on and it feels like it's going to take ages. So luckily for us, we don't actually have to do much coding here. In fact, all we have to do is like write 10 lines because Netlify CMS, the CMS we're using, will create and provide this entire user interface for us. The only thing we have to do is tell Netlify CMS what collections we're actually creating and what fields are in that collection. So what type of content we're managing. In our case, each blog post has a date, title, and so on. So how do we tell Netlify CMS all of this? How do we configure Netlify CMS? The way we'll be doing this is by going back to our project, pressing the static folder in the admin, and then finding this file called config.yml. Now in this file, you'll already see some code already here because I've written some stuff for you. These text here is different options, and it kind of configures a Netlify CMS to do the correct things. This first option, backend, tells Netlify CMS where to upload our, in our case, our blog posts to. So instead of this repo thing here, we're gonna write our specific repository we just made. So in my case, it'll be called atia-git/personal portfolio. So I'm just gonna fill that in. so, double checking, okay. And then these two next options, media folder and public folder, isn't really important for us. This is only important in the case if the user uploads images or other static content inside a blog post, it will all be uploaded to this folder /assets. Let's assume that they won't for now. The next field is where we actually define the collection. In our case, a blog. So we first write collections and then a colon, and then a new line, I'm gonna press tab, and then name our collection. So dash space name, and then we give it name of blog, then enter again, indent, and then give it a label. This is going to be a capital B blog. This is what the user will see. So going back to my image here. So this capital blog, this is what the label is. Oops. And the next option here is the folder. And this folder is the folder that Netlify CMS will upload our blog post to. So in our case, it will be uploading the blog post to this folder here. So we're gonna write blog. Next option is create, and we're gonna set that to true. This will tell Netlify CMS to actually create blog posts. And then we define the fields. The way we do this is write fields, and then on a new line, we're gonna write a tab. And for each field, we're gonna write the following. So dash space, and then in curly braces, we write the field name. So going back to our image, it'll be date for the first field. So name is date. Label is capital D date. And then optionally, we can provide a widget. Now I don't talk about widgets here. So widgets are, well, what the user interacts with in order to input the field. So in our case, the date will be entered using a datetime widget. So if the user clicks this date input field here, then they will see this thing, which is a datetime widget. Now, if we omit this widget option, then it will default to a text box. And this last widget down here is called a markdown widget because it's a fully fledged markdown editor. So for the widget, we'll write a date time. And then we're gonna do the same for all of the fields. So the next one is title. We'll just copy paste that. Oops. Change it to author. Yeah, I have a question. It says, was Gatsby plugin Netlify CMS pre-installed on the template? And yep, that was already pre-installed on the template. I'll talk about that a bit more later when I talk about plugins. So I'm gonna continue with the code. Yep. Give it a label of author. The last one is path. Like so. The last one is, I think, body. Body label body, and then we'll give that a widget of markdown. Sweet. So I think that should be it for the configuration. And hopefully when we run Gatsby develop, so down here, I'm going to run the whole website. Press enter. Just wait for that to run. Cool. Let's open up localhost 8000 and then change the path. So this, I'm going to write /admin like this. And then we're going to find this page. And Netlify CMS is prompting us to log in using GitHub. So we're going to press this, and you'll be redirected to log in with GitHub. I think I'm already done that, so I just get redirected automatically. And then we get well, what we want. It's the same thing as our image. We have our collections and we have our one blog post that is already here in our blog folder. So just going back here, I've already created a blog post just to show you. And let's create a blog post. So we can press this new blog button. We can give this blog a title. I'll call it my first blog post. The author can be me, Alan. And the path is again the part of the URL that the user has to go to in order to visit this blog post. In my case, I'll just call it first blog post. So in our case, if the user visits localhost 8000 and then / first blog post, then they would have, they will see this when we make it. So the next thing is the body. Let's write something for the body. So blog post. And just like any other Markdown editor, we can actually bold some text. We can even italicize them like this. And once we're happy, we can publish this. So going to publish, we can press publish now. And Netlify CMS will upload this blog post to our Git repository. So going back to our Git repository, it says entry saved. And if I were to refresh this page, you'll see a new commit that was made 12 seconds ago, which says create blog, my first blog post. This was made by Netlify CMS. And you'll see my blog post that I just made. Sweet. So here's a question. So despite the fact that I can see my new blog post inside my Git repository on GitHub, I can't see it in this folder, in this blog folder. Could someone tell me why? Yeah, sweet. So the answer is that you need to git pull, because all of this is done on my remote repository, and you won't see it in your local repository. So in order to pull these changes, you have to run git pull. So if you're using Visual Studio Code, you can go back to this source control button and then click on these 3 dots. And then you can press pull. Let's pull down that post that we just made. So here it is, my first blog post. That's what I just made. Sweet. So that is the first step in creating our blog. So we created the interface for users to write blog posts. Now the next, oh yeah, by the way, I think you're going to get a Google Home Mini also. Yeah, sweet. The next step is to create a page that will display all of the blog posts, right? And just to show you what that will look like, close this, and I'll open up this. So this is what that final page will look like. Again, we have that header component that we made, and we're going to display all of the blog posts that we have in the blog folder. All right, so here's one and another. So how do we go about doing this? The problem is that we have all of our blog posts inside this blog folder, and we need some way of retrieving the blog posts inside this folder and displaying it on the page. In order to do this, we will use something called Gatsby plugins and also GraphQL. Let's first talk about Gatsby plugins. So if I were to go to my gatsbyconfig.js page, you'll see a list of plugins. Currently, there are 3 of them. This last plugin, called Gatsby Plugin Netlify CMS, took care of creating that entire that entire UI where you can make your own blog post. So this plugin did that whole thing for you. Oh yeah, by the way, what is a plugin? A plugin is just a normal NPM package. So it's just code that other people have written that integrates well with Gatsby, and it helps speed up development time. So the important parts of these plugins are these two: Gatsby source file system and Gatsby transformer remark. Just to give you an overview of what they do, Gatsby source file system will go to the path that I've described here, so this blog directory, and it will load in all of the files inside this blog directory into Gatsby's data layer. Now, once they're in the data layer, they are easily queryable using GraphQL. That's pretty much the only thing you need to know about them. They can be easily queried using GraphQL. Now, the second plugin is Gatsby transformer remark, and it will look at all of the files that this first plugin loaded in, figure out which ones of them are markdown. So both of these posts are .md files or markdown files, and it will parse them and convert them into markdown nodes. And again, the only point of this is that it becomes easier to use and you can easily query them using GraphQL. So I've talked about GraphQL quite a bit, and I'll just show you what it is. So GraphQL is a query language, and it allows you to retrieve data from different data sources. So in our case, the data we want is the blog posts, and where we're going to get it is from Gatsby's data layer. So this is an example of a GraphQL query. It sort of looks like a JavaScript object, but with the actual values missing. So usually there will be a key value pair, but the value is missing here. And that's sort of what is going on. So what's actually going on is that we are requesting these particular fields from the data layer. So we're requesting the site metadata field, and the title field. And when we send this query to the data layer or the API, it will return these fields. It will retrieve these fields and return it. So let's look at the response. So this is the response of that query. So we get back something that looks really similar to what we requested, a JavaScript object containing those fields, but with the value pair associated with it. So we get back the title in this case. That's what we requested. Just to give you another example, here is another GraphQL query. In this case, we're requesting all these fields. Most importantly, we're requesting the author, the date, and the title. What we get back is something that looks like this. So we get back the author, the date, and the title. So this format looks extremely similar to what we get back. So you might be wondering what this data and this extension thing here is. And that's something that's generated by Gatsby automatically, so we don't have to worry about it. We just need to care about this response here, because that's what we requested. Now that was sort of like a wishy-washy introduction to GraphQL. And to be honest, this isn't a workshop dedicated to it, so we won't be going super in depth into it, but we will be writing a few queries. So the next natural step is, how do we create a GraphQL query? And more specifically, how do we know what fields we can actually request? So in this case, we knew that we can request all of these fields. How do we know that? Well, thankfully, writing these queries and figuring out the fields we can request is easy due to Gatsby's integration with GraphQL. So in order to write these queries, let's go back to our project and look up until we see this link here. You'll see a link, localhost 8000 /___GraphQL. So let's click on that, open it up, and you'll be redirected to this page here. Just a moment. Okay. Sweet. So this middle view here is where we will write the GraphQL query. This right-hand side pane is where we will see the result of the query. So if I were to write a query and press this play button here, I would see the result here. Now, the most important part of this website is this left-hand side. And this is where we can see the different fields that we can request. So the ones we'll be using is this field, all markdown remark and markdown remark. These two fields are automatically generated by that plugin I was talking about before. So this Gatsby Transformer Remark plugin will create these fields for us. Now, if I were to click on all markdown remark, you can see that the query is being generated for us. And so just clicking through the different fields, it will be updated here. Now, one thing I forgot to mention is the fact that we can name GraphQL queries. And the reason you might want to name them is so that you can see what they do at a glance. So in our case, let's make a query that will get all the blog posts. Name it get all blog posts. And once I name it here, it's automatically being rendered here. Okay, so what do we need to retrieve? So let's click on nodes down here. And then we get a whole lot of fields that we can request. Now, just to explain what some of these fields mean, I'll go back to my example blog and explain this a bit. So this main part of the blog post is called the body. And that plugin I talked about before will convert this body into HTML. And if we wanted to get that, we can go back and request this HTML field here. This top part is called the front matter, and it sort of contains the metadata for the blog post. So in my case, in our case, it will contain the date, the title, the author, and the path. So if I will go back and click on front matter, here is the fields that you can request. So we can click on author, date, just to show you, it's being filled in here. Author, date, path, and title. And one other thing, our example here shows a summary of the body. So how do we get a summary of the body? Well, we can use this excerpt here, excerpt field. This just contains a summary of the body here. So it maybe contains the first 10 lines. So we'll request that. One other thing we'll request is the ID. And the ID, if you look back, is not defined anywhere here. It's actually pre-generated by Gatsby and is guaranteed to be unique for each blog post. So we can eventually use it to identify a blog post, but that's later on. Now I'll press the play button to execute the query. And then over here, you can see the response. Again, you can ignore the data and the extensions part. What we're really interested in is this list here. This list contains all the information we want for a specific blog post. So here's one blog post. We have our example blog, the correct title, and a summary. And here we have the second blog post. And this is the one I just made. First blog post, the title of my first blog post. So sweet. We've constructed our first GraphQL query, and we're ready to use it. But you might be thinking, okay, that's cool and all. We've written a query and we got a response back here, but how do I actually use it in a page? Well, thankfully, due to Gatsby's, again, integration with GraphQL, it's really easy to execute this query. Before we do that, let's just copy this query and make a new page for our blog. Let's go back to our Visual Studio Code, right-click Pages, click on New File, and new file called blog.js. So this will contain our blog post. It will be this page. Again, let's import React from React. One other thing you want to import is GraphQL. So in order to do that, let's import within curly braces GraphQL from Gatsby. Okay, and then we write our component. So in order to do that, just like before, we're going to export default function. We'll call this blog, parentheses, inside this, we're going to return a single HTML element. And for now, I'll leave this empty. Now, in order to execute this query, I'm just going to copy paste this. And in order to execute it, I mean, we have to export a variable that contains this query. So export, and then we create a JavaScript variable, const query is equal to GraphQL, because this is a GraphQL query, and then within backticks, so this backticks is in all quotes, it's above the tab key on your keyboard, and within that, we just paste our query. Okay, so that is our query. And so when Gatsby sees this GraphQL query, it will execute it, and it will return this entire result as a parameter into this function. So we can access this whole result just by making a variable called result here. And one thing to note is that we're not really interested in the entire response. All we're interested in is this list here, right? Because this list contains the blog post information we're interested in. So in order to do that, let's just drill down the different keys until we get to this list. Let's make a variable called posts. That will be a list. Oops. We'll call it result dot, in this case, data dot all markdown remark dot nodes. Data all markdown mark dot nodes. So, and now posts is equal to this list here. Okay. So now we're going to write some HTML. Just like before, let's create an empty div to wrap the entire thing in. And let's go through each element in the posts list. So we're going through each post and then spit out some HTML for them. So just looking back at the image, we're going through each post one at a time and rendering this HTML. The way we'll do this is using the map function. First of all, to embed JavaScript inside this HTML here, we have to write curly braces. Inside this, we can use this variable. So we write posts.map, and we're mapping over each post. So we're going to get each post one at a time. And for each post, we will return some HTML, and we write this HTML within this function here. Now this is a arrow function. So it's equals and a greater than sign. Inside this, we're going to write a div, and this div will be this blog entry here. So let's close that up. Let's have a heading. This heading can contain the title of the blog post. In order to do this, we again need to embed some JavaScript. So we're going to write curly braces. And we're going to write post dot, and we have to figure out what we want to get. So in our case, it'll be post dot front matter dot title in order to get this title. So let's write that front matter dot title. And this will now, this heading will contain all this example. Let's create one for the date. Let's store the date, I believe. I think that's next. Yep, the date. And I think that's also in the front matter. Yep. So we just do post dot front matter dot date. And lastly, we want a p tag. And inside this paragraph tag, we are going to put the excerpt. Like so. So I just got a question here. How does this GraphQL backtick thing work? It's not a parameter of a function. So this is a special syntax from JavaScript called a template literal, I believe. And it will be behind the scenes converted into a function, and this will be passed in as a parameter, I think. But that's like advanced stuff. I don't think you should know that for this workshop. Okay, So we've gone through each post in our posts list, and we spit out some HTML for it. And yeah, I think that's it. Let's go see this. So just save this page, go back to our localhost 8000. Let's open it up here. Let's go to the blog. And here you can see our blog posts. That's exactly what we want. However, it's not styled to what's pictured here. So what's missing? So the first thing is that our header is missing, and all of our blog posts should be centered on the page. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's first import the header from /components/header. So this is the header component we just made before. And let's use it. And we're getting all these squiggly lines. It says JSX expressions must have one parent element. Again, as Sanan explained, this should all be wrapped within one HTML element. We could use the React fragment thing here, but I'm just going to use a div to wrap them. By doing this, if you go back, here is our header. Sweet. And the last thing we want to do, or one of the last things we want to do, is center the blog posts. The way we'll do that is by reusing the class name that we made before. Now, if you think back, we actually made a class name called container. Going back to styles, and this container will center everything in it. So we'll reuse that here. We'll just set this div class name to container. And sweet, it is centered. Now there is a couple of more things we have to do compared to here. So this title here is actually clickable. So how do we make it clickable here? And it should redirect to the path that is found in the the GraphQL result. So if you look closely here, there is a path here. And we want the user, if they click on that title, they should be redirected to this path. They should be linked to this path. The way we'll do that is by using the link component that we saw before. So just going up to this import statement here, we can write a comma after GraphQL and write link to import that link component. And then within this h1 tag, we will use that link component. So we're going to write link. And then we'll move this closing to right after the title, like so. And then we'll put in the attribute to, where are we linking to? So in this case, within curly braces, we'll write post.frontMatter.path. So we are linking to this specific path here. Okay. So just to recap what we've done, we have retrieved all of the blog posts using this query here, get all blog posts, and GraphQL will inject the result as a parameter here called result. And we retrieve the list by drilling down the object until we get to the posts. And then we go through each post and return some HTML. One other thing we have to do is, just for React, every time we use this map function here, we have to provide a key attribute to the top level HTML tag here. So we provide a key attribute which must be unique. So in our case, we'll provide the post.id. Now this is just a React thing, I believe, and you don't really need to know much about that. So if we're going back to our website, you'll see our completed blog page. So it has a header, and it is each blog post. I think it looks exactly the same, except for the date. We'll format the date, I guess, after if we have time. So the next step is to create individual pages for each blog post. So if I were to click on this example blog post here, it would redirect me to a 404 page because this page here, example blog, doesn't exist yet. So we have to create that. Now, to show you what that will look like, it looked really plain, but that's fine. It looks something like this. We have the title, we have the author, and then the entire body of the blog post. So not just an excerpt, the entire body. So the way do that is going back to the project and thinking about it, because if we were to create a page manually like this, we would come into some problems. Because if you think about it, each blog post here has the exact same format. It has the exact same layout. It has the title, and then the author, and then the body. And we don't want to duplicate this code. And the second reason why we don't want to manually create it is because, well, what if there was 100 blog posts here? It would be a pain to create a page manually for each of them. So what are we going to do? We just have a question from Menti. Since we're using an API, is the blog not statically rendered? No, it will be statically rendered. So when we build our Gatsby project, the entire website will be built using the current blog post that we have. Again, the GraphQL we execute isn't being done on an external API. It's being executed in Gatsby's own data layer. So yeah, so it can still be statically rendered. Another question, do we need to handle if posts is null or an array for .map? I mean, ideally, yes, you would handle that. But for the purposes of this, I guess, workshop, I'll take the assumption that none of the posts will be null. And I guess I'll continue. So where was I? All right, creating individual pages. So as I said before, creating pages manually, like we've done before, is not a good idea because, well, if there's 100 blog posts, then you would have to create 100 pages manually. That's not really feasible. So thankfully, Gatsby allows us to create pages dynamically. And the way we'll be doing that is by going to this Gatsby node.js file. So if you go to the Gatsby node.js file, you'll find a function called create page. Now this function does exactly what you think it does. It creates a page. And just to explain it more, this function create page will take in an object as a parameter. And this object will have 3 keys. It'll have path, and this path is the URL it's the segment of the URL that the user has to go to in order to see our blog post. So in our case, it will be, just going to the GraphQL query again, it will be this path here that we want to try provide into that create page key. And the second key is component. So this is what the user will see if they go to this page. It's just a normal React component. And then the last one, which is probably the most complicated one, is the context. And the context is just an object, normal JavaScript object. And whatever is inside this JavaScript object will be passed in as a parameter to any GraphQL queries within this page. Now, we haven't seen GraphQL queries with parameters before, but it works just like JavaScript functions. If we pass in a value, the query will use it somewhere. You'll see an example in a second to solidify this. So in our case, we will eventually pass the ID of the blog post that we want to show in our component. Now this might seem confusing, but I'll just, it'll make sense afterwards. So let's first make a GraphQL query that will take in a parameter of ID. So let's go back here. Let's delete this for now. And let's rename our query to, in our case, this query will retrieve a blog post given a specific ID. So we'll call it get blog post by ID. All right, so in order to pass in a parameter, it looks just like a JavaScript function. We write parentheses, and then within this, we write our variable. Now in GraphQL, variables start with a $. We write $, and then we give it a variable name, so ID, and they also have a type, so type string. And then we can use this variable inside our GraphQL query here. So instead of using all markdown remark field here, this will query all of the blog posts. We will query for a specific one. So let's click on markdown remark, and then just tick the fields that we want. So author, date, path, title. And in this case, we also want the HTML, the full HTML. And then we want to match the ID that was passed in to the blog post ID. So how do we do this? Well, let's go down here until we see this purple text. And this are different operations that we can do on this markdown remark field. So if you click ID and press equals, this will find the blog post with the ID that matches the one that was passed in. So in this case, it will be an empty string, but we can use our variable. All right, so this is our blog post. It takes in a parameter of ID, and it uses it to match it. So if we just execute this, it will retrieve the first blog post. And just looking at the response, we get back the font matter and the HTML, just as we expect. So let's use this query. Let's just copy and paste it for now. Copy, I mean, for now. And then we can move on to making this component. So what the user will see. So since all of the blog posts share the same, well, common layout, we will create a template component for it. So let's go back and right click the source folder, create a new folder called templates. And then create a new file in here called post.js. And this file will contain a React component that will serve as a template for all of the blog posts. Just like before, let's import React from React. Oh, we're going a bit over time, that's fine. And then like before, export default function post. And then let's return some HTML. I'll leave it empty for now. We want to use the query that we just made to retrieve a specific blog post. So we do export const query is equal to GraphQL, just like we did before, GraphQL inside backticks, copy paste this query. And then when GraphQL executes, or when Gatsby executes this query, it will again be passed in as a parameter into this function. So you can access it using result. Result, and use it in our function here. Oh, so just one thing, I didn't really explain where we get this ID from. So as I said before, inside the Gatsby node.js file, we have a variable called context. And so anything that is passed into this context variable will be passed in as a parameter into this query. So for instance, if I have this ID key here and give it a value of that, 242345, whatever, it will be passed in as a parameter here. So, and then it can use that ID to find the corresponding blog post. So let's delete that for now. Okay, so looking at the response here, we aren't really interested in data and markdown remark again. We're just interested in this object here. So let's drill down to that object. So const post is equal to result.data dot, I think it's markdown remark. And then we can write some HTML. So we write an empty div. Inside this div, let's have a heading. And again, we're embedding JavaScript in curly braces, post.frontMatter.title. And we'll also display the author. So in heading 2 tags, write some JavaScript. Post.frontMatter.author. If you're wondering where am I getting all these fields from, I'm getting it from here. So it's frontMatter.title and frontMatter.author. And then we have to somehow paste this HTML into our component here. So how do we do that? How do we inject HTML into something that we're writing? Well, the way we'll do it, it looks a bit dodgy, but it's fine. We're going to first write a div and immediately close it like so. The self-closing tag, like Sanan showed before. And inside this, we're going to write an attribute called dangerously set inner HTML. Now, while it does say it's dangerous, I mean, it's only dangerous if this HTML here is malformed. In our case, this HTML isn't malformed because it's generated by the plugin. Hopefully that doesn't break. And we're going to set this dangerously set inner HTML. We want to write some JavaScript. So again, curly braces, and we want to pass in an object. And inside this object, this curly braces again, and write underscore HTML, and then post.html. So we are taking all of this HTML. So if you can see, there are paragraph tags over here. And we're going to inject them inside this div. So it's going to set the inner HTML of this div to this paragraph tag. Cool. I think that's it for this component. And yeah, so let's go back to our Gatsby node.js file. So I have a question, inner HTML versus dangerously set inner HTML. I believe you can't use inner HTML in React, this HTML that we write here. So I have put dangerously set inner HTML. Okay, so just to move on because of time, we are going to write, oh yeah, we were on this create page function here. So we've created our component. So we've done that part. And I have written some comments above here just to guide us as we follow through to using this function. So the first thing we have to do, as you can see from the comment, is to get all the blog posts using GraphQL. So we've done that already. We already have a query that does that. So let's use it. I got another question from Menti. Is it possible to inject scripts into dangerously set inner HTML? You know what? I'm not completely sure, but probably, and that's probably the reason why it's dangerous. So yeah, you probably will have to, but again, this is generated by the plugin. But again, but if the plugin doesn't handle it, I guess, yeah, you would need to manually handle it. I'm not fully sure about that though, so you'd have to search that up. So let's go back to our blog folder here and get that query that we made before to get all blog posts. And create a variable, const. All right. So the syntax to execute GraphQL here is slightly different from what we've been used to. So before we had a GraphQL template literal here, but we can't do that inside this Gatsby node.js file. So instead, we're going to be using a function. And one other thing is, before, inside our blog file, when we exported this query, Gatsby would execute it and pass it in as a parameter into the component. Again, we don't have a component to pass this into, so we will immediately get the result. So let's make a variable called result and set that equal to GraphQL. And then within parentheses, because this is a function, it's different syntax from before, but we're going to use backticks again and just paste our query in. And one other thing we need to do is stick in a wait in front of this, because GraphQL is an asynchronous function and we need to wait for this to complete. So now this result will contain all of our blog posts. The next thing we need to do is get the blog post template. So that component we just made before, this post.js. The way we will do this is by simply getting the path to that component. So let's go const component is equal to path.resolve. Inside here, we specify the path to that component. So it'll be source/templates/host.js. Okay, so component is now equal to the path to that component. All right. So we have all the blog posts, we have the blog post template, and now we're ready to call this create page function. We have all the information necessary. The first thing we need to do is go through each post in this object here. And let me just execute this query just to see what the result looked like. So this is what the result will look like. So first we need to drill down until we get to the list. We'll do down here, do result.data.allMarkdown.remark.nodes. And then we will have to go through each element of this list, so one at a time, and create a page. The way we will do this is using a for each method here. And the for each method will go through each element of the list, so each post in this case, and it will run some code that we specify. So we specify it using this arrow function. So equals greater than sign, and then within parentheses, we're going to copy this create page function and paste it here. So essentially what we're doing is going through each blog post and creating a page. Now, the path we pass in will be this path. So it'll be the post.frontmatter.path. So let's pass that in. .frontmatter.path. The component is that component we made before. So we'll just pass that in. And the context is the ID that we want to pass in, so the blog post ID. So it will be this particular field. And that is just post.id. All right, and if you go scrolling down, we will see some warning. It'll say the develop process needs to be restarted to apply the changes to Gatsby node.js. And the reason why it's saying this is because this whole file will be executed once when we run Gatsby develop or run Gatsby build. It will run at the beginning of that. So if we want to run this file again, then we will have to restart the process. So one way to do this is just to kill the terminal and get a new terminal and write Gatsby develop again. But just before that, let me just see if it's all fine. So I'm just going to explain what we're doing here. First, we're going to retrieve all of the blog posts using GraphQL. And then we retrieve that component we made, post.js. And for each of the blog posts, we're creating a page, and we have to pass in a object for that with 3 keys, the path to that component, the path that the user has to visit to see the blog post. The component that we made is what the user will see, and the context is information that we will need to pass into the GraphQL query within this page. And I think that's okay. So let's run Gatsby develop and wait for that to run. Oh, it seems like I forgot something. So if we go back to our post.js, yeah. So we use GraphQL here. So we need to import it here. So import GraphQL from Gatsby. I think it should run fine either way. So let's go here. Let's refresh the page. Let's click on a post, and here we can see our blog post. It doesn't look exactly the same as the picture because we don't have our header and it's not centered. So let's quickly do that. Header. Let's import that also. Import header from. And we're getting some red squiggly lines. It says must have one parent element. Again, we need to wrap this in the div or use the React fragment thing. And if we refresh this, you'll see the header, and we just need to center this. So in order to center this, let's write class name. Let's reuse that container class we used before. So class name is equal to container. And sweet. So this is our blog functionality done. So if you go to the blog page, it shows our blog. Click on one, it shows an individual blog post. And I think that is the end of our workshop. If you have any questions about anything we've done, we'll stick around for a bit to answer them.